أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم من همزه ونفخه ونفثه بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسولنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. So today we're going to go into again a little bit of background, but I sort of tweaked the questions slightly, so they're not the usual kind, where I sort of check in how everything is going. This time I'm sort of focusing more on application. So how have you been vision planning? In other words, have you been vision planning, right? And have you been vision planning, but then also aligning them with reality, as in a reality check with your visions. For example, let me give you an example that may be sort of a typical example of some people. So for example, some youth, when they want to get married, they have this idea of how life is going to be, right? And how they want life to be. And they sort of, whoever the first person is that they connect with, they end up getting really deep with that person. And that can become problematic. So in this case, let's say a girl gets a guy to come and talk to her, right? And there's an Islamic etiquette on how this is supposed to go, and obviously people shouldn't get too connected when like they haven't actually committed to getting married. But what ends up happening is that before the commitments happen, people get really, really connected, and then when the marriage doesn't actually even start, doesn't even go through, right? Then there's heartaches and things like that. So Islam gives us a way to sort of match things and stuff, right? To do it the right way. Now the reason I mentioned this is because in this context, you might have a person who just got introduced to somebody, and then the parents said that you guys can talk to each other, right? But they weren't really in the middle, right? And it was sort of not really serious talk. It was more how just kind of getting really comfortable with that person. You were just talking about random things, whatever you want to talk about and stuff, right? And so naturally, when you get to know a person like that, you sort of get attached to that person, especially if you have this idea of marriage attached to it, that yeah, one day maybe we'll get married or something like that. Then they get a little bit more deep into it, right? And so what I'm trying to say over here is that the people that are getting into this, because they're new to this, they need some sort of external support and monitoring. But when that doesn't happen, a lot of things sort of progress a certain way, and then people might get married and stuff. They thought that they're gonna live life a certain way, but then reality hits them and things really don't go the way they thought it's gonna go, right? And so their dreams and visions sort of shatter in front of them, or they seem to be not really where they the visions seem to be sort of okay, so there seem to be obstacles in the path of the visions that they had beforehand, and so there's a lot of frustration that brews and a lot of conflict that comes up, right? And so it ends up sort of making the two sides sort of against each other, and things really don't go the way they might have gone otherwise. And so you'll notice a lot of these kinds of situations we'll see around in our context, when you see, for example, the divorce rates, for example, right? So there's this idea that things were not done in a certain way. They didn't really match with how reality works. People sort of thought they were living in la la land, sort of, right? And then they sort of imagine life like that. They came together, reality sort of hit them. It didn't match with la la land, and as a result, conflicts happen, struggles happen, and these things overwhelmed the people until they thought that the other side was not doing what they were supposed to, and they didn't really accept the fact that maybe what they were expecting from the other side was not realistic. It was just sort of a fantasy thing, right? So a conflict like that could be not connected to reality, even though it was a vision. You might have thought you wanted to have white picket fences and things like that, but maybe life doesn't work that way, right? And it didn't happen that way. And so you sort of got into this mindset. No, I want my reality, my vision, sort of, right, to happen the way I want it to happen. And when it doesn't happen, I get upset at everyone else and don't really change myself, right? So this is the question that I'm asking over here. And the same thing you can be said about your careers, for example. Same thing can be said when you're raising kids, for example. The same thing can be said when you have friends and you have certain expectations and you have certain goals and dreams. Same thing can be said when you're starting a company with somebody else, for example, and you have a partnership and stuff, but that you don't take things seriously and so on. And then in the contract you might not have, for example, an exit clause, Like let's say two partners, one of them wants to get out. What's the exit clause? What's the procedure and stuff, right? Um, when that happens, you sort of like say, wait, we never thought about that because we thought we're going to be friends forever and like, we're going to work together and stuff, and we're never going to like, go our separate ways and stuff. These things happen. So these conflicts like this happen. Um, Also, when you work in a group project, something like that could happen where you were expecting everyone. This is a matter of expectation, so that's a key word over here. You were expecting a person to do something a certain way, but then that group member didn't really put all the effort in, or maybe they did something a different way than you would have expected it, and so you sort of start blaming that person for whatever grade you end up getting and stuff, not realizing that you had maybe misread the situation. You sort of misunderstood the expectations that were supposed to be, that would have been better, and you sort of put your own expectations that didn't really align with reality, right? So that's what I mean by have you been vision planning, number one? As in, are you vision planning, or are you just arbitrarily going around in the world, just kind of going day by day? And are you checking to see if your visions align with reality, right? And then how are you optimizing or adjusting your worldviews according to the new realities you've learned? That implies in here that you're actually constantly learning new realities, as in you're actually seeking out what the truth is, what the facts are, as opposed to just our capital, our small t truths, right? You're actually trying to figure out the capital T truths, and sort of like adjusting your small t truths to align with the capital T truths, right? And then how often are you currently evaluating your current state of being? Meaning, how often are you sort of assessing where you stand currently, your point A, relative to point B, where you want to end up getting? So how often is this procedure happening? Is it happening? Why is it happening? Why is it not happening? What's going on in terms of struggles and all that? So we talked about end vision point B. We're going to talk about inshallah point A. We already started it last time. I'm just going to add a little bit on it today. I don't have stories and so on too much. I just have some general stuff that we can go over inshallah. And we already talked about matching things with reality. Okay, so this is what we talked about last time. We went over what is the current situation, and you can go into as much detail as you want to, so you're very clear on this. And what you want to do is to do research and consultation. You can figure out how things are currently. If you don't know what they look like right now, then you can investigate them a little bit more. You can start asking people questions and stuff if you're in a company, or if you're in a group or a team or whatever. If you're alone, you can sort of like, you can still ask people questions about what they think of you in a particular context that you're working on, or what they can recommend to you in terms of like some things that they did in terms of whatever success is defined as in that context, right? And then you can sort of like do this kind of research and consultation, and then you can analyze the information to figure out, okay, how is this going? What is this? What people are saying, is that realistic? Is this something that matches reality or not? Is it something that's feasible? Is it something that I can work on? Is it something that I've already addressed? What's going on, right? So you can analyze and assess that. And then also you're going to be able to figure out, okay, now I've narrowed down, these are the needs, these are the strengths that I have, these are the weaknesses, and these are the obstacles, or like barriers to entry, for example, or whatever. You can discuss all that, and you can sort of sit down. You can do it in a team setting, you could do it in a company setting, organization setting, you could do it individually, whatever that means, right? In your context. But this is a general thing that applies to you. And we talked about there are different ways. And there's, for example, we talked about in fiqh that the fuqaha don't make decisions unless after they understand the actual matter in depth, right? So for example, before they give a ruling on anything, whether it's Bitcoin, whether it's like I don't know, um, like investing, for example, in a particular company, whether it's like doing a certain kind of business transaction, whether it's sort of is it okay to marry like this person or that person and stuff. All these things they're gonna evaluate, but they're gonna have to be given information. They're gonna ask questions. There was somebody who mentioned, for example, that if you were to ask the Sahaba radiallahu anhum if marijuana, for example, is halal or haram, right? They would ask you, okay, what is marijuana? what is cocaine, for example. They'll ask you these questions so that they'll understand how it works, what goes on with it and stuff, and how it impacts people and stuff, all that stuff, right? They're going to ask you all the details, and then they'll say, okay, they'll apply, for example, one principle of the Prophet said, that every intoxicant is haram. Okay, so they're going to say, okay, they're going to evaluate, and in this context, if they realize that this is an intoxicant, right, and there's no need for it and things like that, then they might say, for example, okay, based on this rule, based on this other rule, whatever, this is haram. So the hukum is a hukum of anything is a branch of its, like it's a result, I guess you could say, of its full understanding, right? So the whole picture, if you look at the whole picture, the hukum on something is a branch of or a result of understanding the full picture. So this is what some examples that we talked about, and it's very important for you to have the baseline. And we talked about expectation, making sure you have the right expectations to begin with, right? If you don't have the right expectations, you're not going to be able to really strategically maneuver from point A to point B. Okay, this is the new thing that I want to kind of go over, and I just have 2 or 3 slides inshallah, so I'm not gonna take too much time on this. I just want this as an introduction today to kind of give you an idea of what are the different ways you can analyze, what are the different contexts you might come across, and so on, and how far-reaching this concept is in terms of taking inventory. And in Islam, we also have inventory of ourselves, like muhasabah, where you sort of account yourself, right? Where am I? What am I doing? And stuff like that. In Deen, this is what helps you sort of like stay on track, sort of align yourself, sort of like go back and forth to adjust where you're heading, to align with where you should be going, for example, right? So this is accounting yourself before you're accounted, as Umar radiallahu anhu is said to have said. Okay, so now we have inventory, and there's 2 aspects here. There's the individual aspect, and then there's a group aspect. Individually, meaning, for example, your resume. That could be a summary, obviously it's a summary, right, of some of your skills, some of your experiences, your education, whatever it might be. Your interest, for example, might also be there. So that's something that is an example of like an individual inventory, although it's definitely not comprehensive. So you wouldn't stop here. This is just like a snapshot of what the reality looks like, what your inventory actually would look like. This would just be like a very brief summary of it, right? And I'm going to give you examples, inshallah, of what inventories can look like. And also in the group settings, you can have, for example, a company profile. You can have your financial records, for example, your all the records that are in terms of transactions, in terms of taxes that you might have paid, in terms of income, in terms of like whatever it might be. All of that. You might have a current structure, for example, where your organization runs with a certain structure. Whatever it is, maybe it doesn't have a structure. Maybe the structure is messed up or whatever. Or maybe the structure that's currently there was done and it's working, but it needs a little bit of tweaking. For example, it just needs an update or an optimization because of new context, new situations, or maybe even the circumstances are the same, but the original structure may not have been like 100% perfect, so they might need to address it a little bit and stuff, right? So all of these things, and there's obviously a lot more, but I'm just giving you examples over here so you get the idea behind it, right? So these are some things that you might do in an organization, in a team, in a company, and whatever it is that you're doing. But also you might have like a resume, or you might actually do you should do a more detailed inventory analysis. If you're, for example, looking into personalities and stuff, you can also see like a personality test. If you're doing if you're looking into what kind of jobs match with what kind of interests you have, there's also websites for that. There's also things that you can do according to them. Okay, and then also when it comes to current capacity, this is what you're also assessing. This could be, for example, maybe are you following a calendar? Do you have a calendar? Do you have a daily schedule? Do you do a to-do list, for example? What's going on in your scheduling, for example? Is it all arbitrary? Is it like sort of like everything's up in the air? We'll go, and as they say, play by ear. So whatever is going on there, this is something that this is what you would evaluate. If you don't have a calendar or a schedule or to-do list, you're just arbitrarily doing things, then in that case, that's your current state, and you should be honest about it. And this is what I was saying, you should be raw honest about it, right? I mentioned over here that it should be honest and raw, and it should be objective. Objective meaning like you shouldn't try to say like try to be nice to yourself. It's like it's okay, I know you're trying and stuff like that, so I'm just gonna say that you're actually doing something. No, you have to be honest. If you're trying, but it's still not working, maybe you're succeeding 5 out of like 100 times. Be honest about it. Like say 5 out of 100 times, because then you can adjust and you can have goals that are irrelevant to that. So you can go from 5 to like 7 to like 10 or whatever out of 100 times, right? If you know people that have your students have IEP, it's like they have like a learning, or they have like learning disabilities, for example, or maybe they're just needing some extra help, for example. So they have this like procedure, and these like school therapists or psychologists or whatever, whoever's working with them is going to have certain metrics that they're going to track. For example, they're going to say that the person, one of the metrics might be that the student is able to complete assignments by themselves, and the goal is without cue, 4 out of 5 times. That's the goal. And then they actually ended up doing it 3 out of 5 times. So the person is going to write down that the goal has not been met, but our goal is supposed to be met by this deadline, and this person seems to be in the right projection. So they might have gone from 2 out of 5 times, now they're at 4 out of 5 times, and the trend looks like it will hit the mark when when the deadline arrives, right? So that's that. Making sure that you're very, very clear and honest about what's going on, right? And then also commitments. So what are your daily commitment? What are your actual commitments? This might not be daily commitments, but it might be something, for example, a short-term project that you're involved in. In project management, a project is something that has a deadline, it has an end date to it, okay? Programs don't necessarily need to have an end date. Project might be, for example, like doing a particular fundraiser, and that's, as soon as the fundraiser ends, then that project is ended, right? And so a project could be a short-term commitment, or it could be a long-term one too, but we're just talking about something that's short-term here. And again, short and long-term are relative, so you could define that, but it needs to be clear what you mean by short-term and what you mean by that, and that could be your own definition, but it should be something that's realistic. For example, you're not going to say short-term is like 50 years, for example, right? More reasonably, you might say long-term is 50 years. Generally speaking, for example, they might say short term might be anywhere from 1 month to 3 months to 6 months or something like that, right? And then you have something that's long term, might be like maybe 1 year, or maybe even like 5 years or something like that, 10 years and stuff. That's going to be a little bit more long term. You might even add a defining middle category, um, like a midterm goal or something like that, right? Okay. And commitments might be things, for example, like you are committed to, for like if I put a star over here for the family, because maybe you're an older person and you may not have kids, or you may have kids that are about to go to college, for example, and they're going to be dorming there, or maybe they got married, or they're maybe about to get married and stuff. So you may not have that type of long-term commitment. So it might even be like a short-term commitment from where you're starting off, right? Where you are currently today, right? So it depends. So again, all of these things are like that. That's why I put EG over here. It's like examples, not necessarily something that that I'm specifying. So there's some examples, and again, like depending on the context, you can adjust that. And then also financial resources. Um, in this context, financial resources could be, for example, personally. It could be like what amount of money that you have currently, because you might have a requirement, or like your vision might be to complete a 4-year degree, for example, or to complete a graduate degree, or complete a PhD, or start a business, for example, or whatever it might be, right? Or you want to take a trip, for example, whatever it is, right? So there is, like, for the end goal, right, for the end vision, you have a particular number there. So it's like it's going to cost you $40,000 to get to this trip, for example, or get this degree, or whatever it might be. Or if you want to get married, there's a certain amount that you might have, sort of like thought of, depending on how you're going to navigate it. It might be, for example, $5,000, or it might be $500,000, depending on whatever you're doing, right? So financial resources, the end result, but you also need to be aware of what you need to where you stand today. If you have $5 in your bank account, right, but you need like $500 for a project or whatever you're doing, then make sure that you have that, right? That you have that marked down. Okay, I have 5, I need 500, and then the next step would be to sort of divide how you're going to get there, sort of like plan out a process from point A to point B. And then human resources, this could be in your family members, for example. It could be your network of people, for example, your friends. It could be your school counselor. It could be, for example, the imams. It could be anybody, right? It could be whatever it is that's necessary, whatever you have right now that might be some way related to your end vision, right? But you can also have it generally for anything, right? What is currently, what is available for me currently, for example, and so go from there, right? And having this assessment of yourself where you stand today, it also helps you when you're making, you know, future visions that you haven't thought of yet. You can sort of say, okay, you know, I already know sort of where I stand in terms of all of my resources, and here's where I want to go to. So from there, I can also decide if it's practical, you know, feasible for me to actually get to this end vision compared to where I stand today, right? So keep that in mind. And then again, this can also apply for companies, right? If a company wants to launch a new project, for example, are they able to? Is, you know, are their resources gonna be okay with that? For example, during COVID-19, in the very beginning phases, some companies had cash sort of like sitting aside, and so for them it was a lot easier to sustain this pandemic, right? Because they had this money that they were sort of like just you know, free money, sort of free money, meaning like it's not stuck in something, it's just like cash that's sitting around, right? So they were able to sort of pull from that, and they were able to sustain whatever that, you know, that was needed throughout the pandemic. But others didn't have that kind of cash, so they had to start, you know, borrowing, so they started increasing their debt. And so from a Sharia compliance you know, standpoint, some of these companies that were originally Sharia compliant because, you know, they met some criteria, then ended up not being Sharia compliant because their debt sort of like outweighed a certain, or it went beyond a certain threshold that's allowed for the Sharia compliance stuff, right? So that was one thing, for example. So financial resources, human resources, again, all of these things are important. And because we started the series in the context of COVID-19 to help us sort of navigate things and stuff, right? Also understand that, for example, some of the companies may not have been able to justify their human resources that were available with the financial resources that were available, as well as like the projections of what they were thinking, you know, things look like. So in your current analysis, you can also look at where things are projected to be, right? What is it that I'm able to sustain starting from today? So that could also be part of your assessment of where you stand today. And then the growth, this is what I was talking about, sustainability. Is it reasonable for me to assume that if COVID-19 happens and we're not getting income and stuff, but we have this cash reserve, that we're still going to be able to keep all of our employees, for example, right? And if not, then who do we fire first and stuff? And this is again, that the last part I said, who do we fire first, would be more of like the process, you know, from point A to point B. Yeah, so sustainability would be able to be addressed once you know where you stand today, right? If they had $1 million sort of sitting down, and then their income, or sorry, their expenditure wasn't that much, so they would be able to ride out the pandemic for some time, right? Even if there was a little income. But then those people that had a lot of expenditures, even if they had $1 million as like a cash reserve, but their expenditures were so high, they wouldn't actually be able to sustain their company and growth and stuff. So they may have had to stop some projects, they may have had to stop some brands for, you know, for their company. They may have had to sort of adjust certain marketplaces, for example. They might have had to close some stores, for example. They might have had to lay out some, you know, employees. They might have had to restructure their, you know, or like infrastructure. They might have to sort of like adjust and modify it to adapt to the new context, so they don't burn out. They don't run out of money, for example. They don't. They can still continue growth and stuff. They can, you know, not sink in a hole. They like nothing. Like they can still get something instead of getting nothing. All of these things would be something that you would do, right? And this is something that you would also do for yourself as a human being. For example, are you able to, if you have a schedule, right? Are you able to study for a particular exam that you want to study? Like spending 2 hours a day, is that something that you can sustainably do for the next year, or like until then, like, you know, for the next like 5 days, or not? These are some things that you could discuss, right? And this is where you would be able to actually measure that and assess that. Okay. So I hope that made sense. If you have any questions, I can stop. You can interrupt me, inshallah. If not, then we'll continue. Um, okay. How do we do the inventory assessment? How do we assess where we stand? And again, this is companies, organizations, institutions, groups, teams, whatever it is, right? That doesn't matter. Just understand the concept, because you can actually come up with your own parameters. I remember in one of my engineering classes, actually it was one of the senior designs that I was doing. And so our teacher, the first day, sort of gave us a sheet. And I think I might have mentioned this story in the very beginning, but I wanted to mention it here because it relates to here too. Right, so he gave us a blank sheet of paper that had not blank, but like it was blank in the sense that there was nothing else besides what I'm about to say. It had a picture of a machine, and there was a comment that, you know, the people over here are saying this machine is shaking and it's making lots of noise, and we need to get it fixed. And as an engineer, for example, you're going to look at this and say, okay, where do I start? You have to define your own parameters. You have to define what you're going to test and what you're not going to test. You have potentially a budget, you have time constraint, you have whatever else, right? Human resources constraint, whatever that might be, right? For your company, for their company, and all that. You might also have physical limitation in terms of how much space that you have available, right? All these things are some things that you would be able to sort of put down as parameters. Now you should definitely have some consultation and things like that with other people, with your own team members and stuff, whatever. You might also have certain protocol in place. But at the same time, my point is that a lot of times you have to decide what is relevant and what is, prioritized in terms of what you need to test, what you need to assess, and so on. But these are just general ideas of how you can like do it, right? I'm almost done. I just have one more slide after this, inshallah, and then we'll go from there. But I wanted you to see this. So here's the skills inventory. You might go through this through your career center at your university, or maybe at your high school, or wherever. There's also companies that help you in terms of career development and so on. So you can get that there. So again, like in here, it's just more of like, okay, checklist, whatever it is, and that's it. So fill this out and you get that. Now the career center may take this and say, okay, let's match these with like a particular job, right? Or let's put this in the system, and the system is going to match it with other jobs that have these sort of like tags, right? So essentially these are tags. So there's a job that somebody put in, right? And then they said what are the kind of skills that are needed, so they put some tags on it. They might have said, for example, this person needs to know how to persuade people, right? This person also needs to know how to summarize in their writing skills or their verbal skills, right? So this particular job has these two tags. But then when a person fills it out, the computer is or the system is gonna look at the set of skills that the person has and the set of skills that are required for different jobs. So whichever has the most matches, that person is going to have that as their first, essentially their first option, or for example, first recommendation. So the career or the counselor is going to say, hey, this is something that came up for you, and you should probably go explore this right here. Now, just because you have skills doesn't mean that you're going to like them, right? So they mention over here in this case that you should identify the things that you would like, okay? That's this kind. This one right here is the skills assessment sheet. That's something similar, but now in here they sort of mention something different about it, right? Now you can say if you're competent, but now you can say, okay, is this a favorite or is it something that you enjoy? You can actually designate it as a separate thing. If you check that, you can compare which ones you like versus which ones you're competent in, right? Not everything that you like is going to be something that you're competent in. Not everything you're competent in is going to be something you like. And then maybe you are competent in something, or maybe you're not competent in something, but you may not want to develop it further, right? So that's another thing. So these are something that you can look at. So this is another way of doing it. Again, this is for, this is more for individuals, but you can actually apply this for your employees if you're in a company, for example, or your team members in like a masjid, for example, or organization, like if you're doing like a humanitarian organization or something like that, whatever it is, right? And then in this case, this is where you're rating, okay, highly skilled in that. But now in this case, it doesn't necessarily say that these are some things that you like, but you would go here, answer the question, and then go to the next page and so on. Okay, so that's another way to do it. This is something that you don't have to print out something, you can just do it directly here, and the computer will just tell you, okay, these are the kinds of jobs that match your skill set or whatever. Okay, businesses, this is actually just an article on why companies should do something like this, and it helps you in terms of like understanding why you should get people's inventory, because again, people are your human resources and that they are part of your company, so they determine where you're going to be able to feasibly move forward to, where you stand currently, and so on. So all of that you need to assess by looking at all the different components. Financial is one thing, but human resource is another one. So you need to understand how to assess where your people are. You can look at you can look at the financial sheets and stuff, right, to figure out where your company financially sort of stands, right, and where the projections are financially. But you're going to have to look at sort of like, an inventory status or like a skill set assessment to figure out where your people stand and what they need to work on. You might, for example, offer training for them If you're in a masjid, for example, you can offer training to your employees or your like volunteers based on that, and you can give them transferable skills, for example, that they can apply in different areas, whether at work, for example, or somewhere else. But it also helps in terms of volunteer retention. It helps them sort of feel like they're part of something bigger, but they're also being invested in. They're, obviously we want to, like, volunteers or people that would volunteer because something has meaning to them or whatever. But at the same time, it makes it a little bit easier for the volunteers to actually make long-term commitments if they're actually benefiting from whatever it is that they're getting. So if you can offer volunteer trainings and stuff, that would be really good, especially in those transferable skills that they can apply in different places, right? And that's like a family, like everyone sort of looks out for each other and so on. So it tells you a little bit. Let me actually show you some other things they mentioned in here. So they mentioned make an inventory, so you can decide how you want that. You can use something that's already there, like a template, or you can design something relevant to your context, your company, your organization and stuff, and see which ones are relevant there, and sort of like, assess that. And then they're saying organize your inventory, so be able to sort of like make it searchable, for example, and analyze the skills, plan for the future. So this is what the idea over here. If you don't know where you stand, you're not going to know how to get to where you want to get to, right? So this is going to help you. Okay, this is where we stand. And this is where we want to get to, but at the same time, we're not going to be able to if we don't train our people this way or that way, or if we don't have this system or that system or whatever. So that's that. And then this is just free templates that you can look through, and you can find more of them like this. Now, notice over here, this is leadership skills specifically. So you may have something like this also, not necessarily alone, but also given to your employees. So you can see, like, if your people that are in leadership positions are actually, with leadership skills, or if they're not. So this is going to help you assess that, right? You can also have something where they do what they call peer reviews. You can also do that, and usually companies have something like this where they sort of evaluate. They have like maybe quarterly reviews or maybe yearly reviews or something like that, depending on the context. And so if you don't have that in your organization, this is where you want to do that. Again, like here, life skills, maybe the person is not able to manage their lives really well personally, so they're not being able to contribute as effectively as they would be able to in their work environment, because even though they might be really skilled in their work stuff, they might not be good in life planning and stuff, so they might conflict a little bit, so they impacts their work too. So maybe you can help them train in personal management stuff or whatever. Then once they get that taken care of, they're going to be optimal in terms of performance for their work stuff too. And so there's all these things, right? In this case, this right here, political skills, is so, in the sense of like diplomacy, for example. It can also be diplomacy could be, for example, how people interact with each other, how they network with each other, for example, how they connect with people, how they like inspire people, how what kind of image that they're having with other people, for example. Are they like motivating people, or is their presence sort of like not look like not something that people like, for example. Or maybe it's something where they come in the room and everyone's like amazed and stuff, and they're just like, this is the person that I can spend like an hour with, for example, right? Okay, then you have comparison. Let me just go here. So once you have an understanding of what your needs are for your vision realization, because you mapped out the vision very clearly, right? And then you can assess, okay, that's that. Then when it comes to sort of assessing where I stand today, this is what's going to help me. It's going to help me identify which of those things do I have already, right? And which of the things that I needed for that vision realization do I still need? So this is where that comparison is going to help you understand how to navigate forward. I needed these things. Very clearly you defined the vision, what that looks like. So you knew exactly what the the characteristics are going to be. So now you're looking at, okay, where do I stand today, right? Which of those components for the vision, the end vision, have I already achieved, or do we already have, right? Which of them do I not have? What do I still need? And this is where you can assess that. Okay, so the takeaways essentially is that vision planning is essential. If you don't plan, you're not going to be able to go anywhere. If you don't know where you want to go to, if you don't know which country or which place you want to visit on like a vacation where you're just taking a few days off and just kind of relax, if you don't know where you want to go to, you're not going to be able to go there, right? Because you can't go, like, if you don't know where to go, you can't really go anywhere, right? But also, if you don't know where you are right now, right, you're not going to be able to go somewhere, even if you know where that somewhere is, right? So you need to know where you are today, and you need to know where you want to go to be able to actually go there. if you want to go to Hajj, for example, you know how to get. You know where where to go for Hajj, right? You know where to go, and if you know where you already are, let's say you're in Pakistan, for example, or you're in Canada, or you're in Australia, for example, or wherever, right? If you know where you are, you're going to actually be able to get to Hajj. But if you don't know where you're at, you're not going to be able to get anywhere. So it's very important for us to know both, right? And also, if you want to say, for example, I want to go to Hajj, right? But I want to go to Hajj in Muharram. That's not realistic. That's not going to happen, right? So you also want to make sure that your visions are realistic, right? And when we get to process, inshallah, which is the next part, if you go back here, right? The sort of like the process in terms of like the steps on going from like A to B. How do you get there? That's something that when we talk about, we're also going to talk about realistic stuff, right? So that's why I said it's like step number 0, the idea of reality, matching your small t truths with capital T truths, because it helps us be clear throughout all of these other steps. Okay, so these are the takeaways: making sure that you have a vision, making sure that it's realistic, making sure that you have an assessment of where you stand today, in whatever context you might be, sort of brainstorming on what are things that are relevant. If you already have a vision in mind, then you can sort of figure out which of those relevant things, which are those components of the vision, you have still, so you can design a skills inventory according to that. If, on the other hand, you are trying to figure out where you would like to sort of end up, you have an idea, or maybe even if you don't have an idea, like if you're trying to decide your major, for example, or your career pathway or something, then you could do a skills assessment, and you can use something to, like the tools that we talked about, and you can figure out where you want to end up going. You can also do surveys if you're a company, if you want to launch a product, for example, or if you're trying to figure out, how to go, if there's interest in a service that you want to provide or whatever, you could do surveys, and you'll see companies doing that, right? And then they'll set a vision according to that. Say, okay, now there seems to be more money that could be made over here. They're sort of, saying where they stand. Are we able to do it? This is what the public wants and stuff. And if they are, then they're going to set a particular vision or a goal, and they're going to go towards that. So very important to do that. A lot of times we have arbitrary stuff. We want to, for example, like get to Jannah, but we don't have an idea what Jannah looks like, for example, because we don't explore the year after. What we know from the Quran and the Sunnah and the Prophet like the stuff that was carried on by the scholars. We don't know what that looks like. Just wanted to just conclude on this note that if you want to go to Jannah, then you need to know what Jannah looks like. You need to know what the year after looks like, and you need to know where you stand today. If you don't have those clear things, then you're not gonna get anywhere, right? You can think that you're gonna get somewhere, but you're not actually gonna make progress towards anything. Just like you wanted to get a job, you had to get a degree, for example. You had to get certification. You had to get some experience, and then you got it. Just like that, Jannah is the same, right? And especially with Jannah, because it's a life commitment that you do to get to Jannah, then you need to make sure that you actually do that life commitment. Um, so there's a lot of application in this. If you want to take an exam, if you want to get to a degree, if you want to make a certain amount of money, if you want to have whatever it is, right? Have to be very, very specific and clear, in both the end vision and the current assessment. And you have to be very, very honest about where you stand today. Don't like, don't be overly nice to yourself and be like, it's okay, I think I can do it and stuff like that. No, it's about where you stand today. If you have only one surah memorized in the Quran, and that's Qul Huwallahu Ahad, right? That's it. Okay, be honest about that. If you don't have that memorized, be honest about that. If you're gonna say, well, I just kind of have like maybe like the last juz memorized and stuff like that, I kind of have it memorized, then you're not actually gonna be able to be practical, because as soon as you start taking the path forward, you're gonna start realizing that you didn't really remember some of the stuff from before, and then you're gonna get frustrated and annoyed and stuff. And that's what we were talking about, making sure you make that, you block away, or you sort of remove anything that is going to make you frustrated. So your small t truths, when they don't align with capital T truths, yeah, I kind of know just Hamma and stuff, I sort of remember a little bit whatever and stuff, so I'll just go to just the Barak, right? If I do that, my small t truth is that I'm okay with it, but my capital T truth, the capital T truth in this case, is that I'm not really comfortable with that. So later on, I'm going to get frustrated, I'm going to get overwhelmed, I'm going to get angry, I'm going to get upset and all that, because I did not align my small t truth and change it to make it match the capital T truth. Okay, so that's why that conversation took place before. And because our mindsets, our learning takes place over time, and it's just like, whatever limited experiences and, understanding that we've gone through, and perceptions that we have as a result, right? Because of that, our perceptions, our understandings may not be capital T truths. We align them accordingly from what is known from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the capital T truths. Okay. And there's just two things I mentioned. Capital T truths are things that we have defined. For example, we have pointed at the sun and said we were going to call this the sun, right? Um, or if you, in Arabic, somebody looked up and said, okay, that's called a shams, right? So these are things that are designated, and so this can also be considered capital T truth if we designate it, and every time we point it to it, that's a truth in that sense, right? The color red, for example, or a basketball, if you point it and say this is basketball, you're designating that, right? So that's capital T truth still, right? But also other capital truths are the things about like how the universe works, for example, and how people, do things and stuff, right? So a lot of that content we are getting from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because He knew how He designed everyone and so on. So with that, just finishing up, inshallah, going on the homework thing, see how, be really, really honest, where do you stand today? Are you, are you putting visions down, or are you not? Some people are going to say, well, my life is all in the air because I have, family, I have kids and all that stuff or whatever, and I really can't do it and stuff. I'm gonna be blunt about this, and I'm gonna say that's an excuse. Because if you're going to be like that, your kids are going to be like that too, and you're never going to have organization and stuff, right? And if you're thinking that me saying that, be honest and like, have schedules and goals and things like that is to say that you need to make sure that everything happens according to like whatever that calendar event says and stuff, right? It can't go 1 second more and stuff. I'm not saying that. What I am saying is have a structure there and be realistic, put all this stuff in. If for one day, for example, the calendar event, it didn't go exactly how you wanted, adjust it a little bit and accommodate the reality. Adjust it, modify it, but be actively optimizing whatever it is system that you have put in place. So that's something that that's the counter argument against the people that would say, no, I can't do anything and stuff like that because everything's up in the air. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if my wife is going to call me and like tell me to like bring this food or something like that, or something from the store or whatever, or my kids are going to need to be dropped off here and there and stuff like my schedule's up in there. It's not. You have control over certain things and stuff. So put that in place. The most successful people are organized like that, and they account for those those last minute changes and stuff like that. So you can also account for last minute changes, or you can also account for the times when things are sort of volatile up in the air. You don't know exactly what's going to happen, so block that window off and say, in this time period, I'm not really going to put something, but I'm going to put like 3 or 4 things that I can do in any order that needs to be done, right? So you can accommodate like that. So there's strategies that you can utilize to account for those times when things are up in the air. So if you're not doing them, then this is the time to start doing them. Really evaluate where you want to be. Where is it that you want to see yourself in 10 years, in 5 years, in a year, in a month, right? And tomorrow, what do you want to do tomorrow? If you're not being serious about this, things are not going to get better. So I'm going to push you over here to go ahead and take those steps, inshallah. Be realistic about it. Make sure that you take steps, even if you take like 1 or 2 steps daily. Make sure you still are taking steps. Okay, so that's your homework, to make sure if you're not doing something to start, right? Take a sheet of paper out, do it on your phone, or do it whatever, right? Sit down and list down all the things that you would like to have some progress made in, and then go just list them down, and then set some sort of general visions, and then like map them out, like, detail them out. Say, okay, I want to, in 1 year, I want to memorize 1 page of Surah Al-Baqarah, for example. Okay, that's okay. It's a vision. It's a very clear vision, and it's 1 year specific, right? Time constraint and so on. Then do it. Say, okay, I'm going to break it down, and that's what we're going to talk about later. But make sure that you have some vision and you have an assessment where you stand today. Okay, with that, if you have any questions, you can ask, inshallah. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and close. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.